Chapter 4. Enter the Kentuckians. 1. Beau, the youngest man of the 5 new males, was the first to arrive in Carlisle. It was almost evening when the wizard took him to the town boarding-house for men. Beau signed his name in the big registry book, and the wizard took his leave. Maeve, who ran the boarding-house, showed Beau to his room, then told him that he should come straight away to the kitchen in the center of the large 1-story structure where she would soon be serving dinner. Beau entered the kitchen and waited by the door. When Maeve noticed him, she pulled him near to her and introduced him to the others seated in their places at the table. There was a lot of grumbling from the men at the table when they took notice of Beau. He took a seat near the far end of a long wooden table, which was adjacent to a wall. It had numerous chairs along one side, but was large enough to accommodate 50 people or more quite comfortably. From where Beau sat, 4th in line from the end, he could barely see the food that was being passed gradually his way from the stove, where Maeve removed it and handed it to the person nearest her. As the food came closer, Beau could smell it, and it made his mouth water. He couldn't remember when he had last eaten, and his appetite was huge. Soon a plate containing 4 dinner rolls was passed to Beau by Gus, the man that sat on his right side. He grabbed the platter, seized 3 of the 4 dinner rolls, and put them on his plate. Then he passed the platter on to Owen, the man who sat on his left. Owen divided the remaining dinner roll into 3 equal parts, for himself and the other 2 men at the table's end, Aidan and Fred. Beau took no notice. His attention was on his own 3 rolls, which he busily buttered using the last of the butter on the butter dish. There wasn't so much as a smear of butter left over. Next, a large bowl containing 8 pieces of chicken was passed to Beau by Gus. He took the bowl and chose 6 plump pieces, which he placed on his plate. All that was left in the bowl that he passed on to Owen were 2 chicken wings. Owen became outraged. "How are we supposed to divide these between the 3 of us?" he fumed to no one in particular. Beau paid him no mind. The next dish offered was a large bowl full of Brussels sprouts. They didn't smell very good to Beau. He took not even one and passed the bowl on to Owen. Owen, Aidan, and Fred groaned. If they were to get anything to eat, they had no choice but to take some Brussels sprouts. At least they had butter on them. Beau rubbed his hands together in anticipation of what was coming his way next, a great bowl of mashed potatoes and gravy. There was nothing Beau loved more. When Gus handed it to him, Beau piled his own plate high and passed the bowl on to Owen. Owen couldn't believe the puny amount of potatoes and gravy left in the bowl that Beau handed him. He took a third of it and passed the bowl on to Aidan and Fred. After they divided the small amount left, Owen asked for the bowl back. Not much of anything remained in the bowl, but it was enough to serve Owen's purpose. "Hey, are you crazy?" shouted Beau when Owen brought the inverted bowl down hard on his head. There sat Beau, wearing the bowl like a hat, while the small amount of gravy left rolled down his face and into his ears. "That wasn't a very nice thing to do," Beau told Owen as he used his napkin to wipe away the small amount of gravy from his face, head, and ears. Maeve, who sat at the head of the table, heard the commotion and called out, "Stop it! Stop it now! What are you men up to down there at the foot of the table?" "This gall-darn man here," said Beau as he stood and pointed at Owen, "just put a bowl of food on my head." "And I had a good reason," said Owen. "I didn't do nothing to him," Beau stated loudly. "You certainly did do something," said Owen just as loudly. "Not just to me, but to Aidan and Fred here as well. You were a hog." Then he too stood up and explained to Maeve. "When this man passed the dishes of food on to us, hardly anything was left. All that he gave us plenty of were those smelly green things, and though we hate them, we ate them anyway. He turned to face Bo and said, "What makes you think you're so much more special than us that you can take most of the good food and pass on only the food none of us like?" "Yeah," said Fred, adding his 2 cents. "Hey, I'm a big man, if y'all ain't noticed. A big man like me needs a lot of food." "And we don't need any," complained Owen. "Go get yourself some more food up at the stove," Bo told him. "Mr. Purdy," said Maeve, "there is no more food up at the stove." "Then I don't know what to tell him," said Bo. "Well, I have something to tell you," said Maeve. "In fact, I've several things to tell you. 1, you'll get no dessert tonight. The men whose share of food you ate can split your dessert." "Dang!" said Bo, sitting down hard on the long bench and slamming his fist on the table. 2, said Maeve, because you ate much more than you were supposed to, your punishment will be to wash all the dishes and clean up the kitchen tonight. "Now that just ain't fair," said Bo. "Oh, yes, it is," said Owen. Loud laughter filled the room. Then it quieted as Maeve said, 3, don't begin cleaning up yet, because I have a letter here from the wizard that concerns you." Bo leaned back in his chair with his fingers laced behind his head and said, "Go ahead. Things can't get much worse than they is already." "If you say so," said Maeve, opening the sealed letter. "The wizard writes, please tell Mr. Bo Purdy that he is assigned the following work detail, a job which he will do twice each day." She paused to glare at Bo, then continued reading. "Once when the suns rise, and again just before the suns set. That means, Mr. Purdy, you will need to start your new job right after you finish here in the kitchen." Bo didn't like the severe manner in which Maeve was staring at him. "Well, what's my job?" he said, thinking that it couldn't be anything so bad as what his punishment was tonight. He thought he might have to milk a cow or 2, something he was used to doing anyway. Maeve responded, "Your job is to clean all of the chamber pots within all the outdoor privies of the village twice a day." "What?" said Bo, jolting straight up in his seat so quickly he bashed his knees on the table's underside, sending his wooden spoon with a clatter to the floor. "Ow!" Again the room erupted in laughter. Bo was indignant. "I ain't never been no Johnny house cleaner. That ain't no respectful kind of job." "Respectful or not, the wizard wants you to clean the chamber pot in each and every village privy. It's your job now. Here is a map the wizard asked me to give you. It shows where all the privies in town are positioned." Maeve walked down to where Bo was sitting and handed him the map. "Is this some kind of punishment the wizard has given me for eating so much?" asked Bo as he snatched the map from Maeve's hand. "Or is it my punishment for being from Kentucky?" "It could be one or the other, or both. I really don't know. But I'd watch myself from now on if I were you," said Maeve, enjoying her role as torturer. "The wizard knows all, he hears all, and he sees all." Bo took those words to heart, and from that moment on, he tried to avoid the wizard's attention. He spent that first afternoon in Carlisle cleaning the kitchen of the boarding house and wishing the wizard had assigned him that job to do twice a day instead of cleaning Johnny houses morning and night. 2. One evening after supper, after a week of hard labor and a lot of loneliness, Bo retired to his room to find someone else in it. He looked at the man who stood facing away from him, staring out of the only window of the room. Then he did a double-take. "Chuck? Chuck Whitney?" He couldn't believe his eyes. Chuck, who had been engrossed with the sights outside the window, flinched in surprise. He turned around and looked into the eyes of the man who had just entered. "Well, as I live and breathe, Bo Purdy, is it really you, Bo?" "You better believe it," said Bo as he grasped Chuck's outstretched hand and shook it heartily. "We wondered what happened to you at the Loopback picnic this afternoon," said Chuck. "What are you talking about? That must have been more'n a week ago." "That just ain't so," said Chuck. "The food I ate at the picnic is still in my belly. I ain't even digested it yet." Bo looked at him suspiciously. "Are you sure you're really Chuck Whitney?" "No doubt about it. How'd you get to this place anyways, Bo?" "Well, what happened was kind of strange. I was chasing a couple of them things what people call little uns round my farm. That was before I started out for Loopback. The next thing I knowed, there was a funny-looking man, smaller'n me, in my face, arguing with me. Then he run off, and I chased him inside a cave, but he weren't there no more. Another man was there, a man in a purple robe and hat, who was way taller'n me, if you can believe it, and he pushed me through some hole in the cave wall that spun round and round. It spun me a lot, and then spit me out on the floor of what turned out to be a great big building. Then the man with the tall hat, that the people here call the Wizard, brought me to this here boarding house and told me to stay put. But that ain't all. He told me I gotta clean out all the Johnny houses in town every morning and evening, and that's what I've been doing ever since." "That's sort of like what happened to me," said Chuck. "'Cept I was trying to save a woman from a giant bird, and that man, the Wizard they call him, you say, he saw me chasing that bird and stopped me. He made my head all dizzy, like he put me under a spell, see? Well, next thing I know, I was in the cave, same one you was in, I guess, and the man forced me into the tunnel that spun round and round. When we got to the great big building, he took me out of it and brought me here and checked me in with the landlady. I should have known he was a wizard from all them strange things he done." "Was you given anything to eat before you was brought to this room?" "No, and I ain't asked for none. I told you I still got my picnic lunch in my belly." 3. Chuck was assigned the same work detail as Bo, cleaning outdoor privies, and the next morning the two were working side by side. Bo asked Chuck, "Do you feel like you was being punished, getting Johnny house duty?" "No, not at all," said Chuck. "I was told I gotta work for my upkeep, and that this was the only job open right now. If something better comes up, though, I'd jump at the chance to do it." "Me too," said Bo. "But do you think that'll ever happen? What I think is we're both being punished for being from Kentucky." "That don't make a whole lot of sense, Bo," said Chuck. "I'm not saying I know why we're here, but I don't think we'd be hauled here just 'cause we're from Kentucky." That was enough to put Bo's mind at ease, and he stopped feeling so sorry for himself. The work wasn't half bad now that someone he knew was working alongside with him. He began to forget his paranoia of the Wizard. 4. On Chuck's third day, during their morning chore, he said, "Say, Bo, I never thought you'd take a shine to shining up Johnny houses." He laughed at his own quip. Bo took a slap at Chuck's backside with his cleaning rag and said, "It ain't half bad now that you're here. I don't feel like I'm being punished no more, but I'd still like to know why we're here." "Me too," said Chuck. "And I'd also like to know when we get to go home, 'cause I sure do miss Suzanne and Davy." Chuck turned his head quickly to look out the door as he saw a shadow pass by. "What you looking at?" asked Bo. "I thought I seen the Wizard man, but there weren't nothing there." "Hardly no one here ever sees the Wizard," said Bo. "So I've heard people say. They say he only shows up once in a while, and then everyone crowds up near him so's you can barely see him." I hope I see him next time he's here, said Chuck, so's I can tell him something. And what's that? That I want to go home, and if he won't let me do that, I'm going to ask him to bring Suzanne and Davy to this here place to live. 5. Another week had passed before Mortimer returned to Carnisle. With him he brought 3 new males, completing the moon's prophecy of 5. They were Gennady Breen and his twin sons, George and Glenn. Mortimer had saved the boys from being eaten by a ravenous baby thunderbird, but not before it had severely wounded them. He had needed to bring them to Carnisle in order to heal them. He brought their father as well, for he also had wounds, though not of the physical kind. Gennady had been struck dumb by witnessing his son's tragedy. All 3 Breens were unconscious when they arrived in Mortimer's multi-purpose building. They would stay in the hospital alcove in the northeast corner of the edifice until he could heal Glenn's raw, bloody cheek where the bird had torn off his flesh, and restore George's eye, which the bird had plucked neatly from its socket. Assisted by magic ointment from his vast stores within a huge drawered chest, he fixed the wounds of both boys while they were in a healing trance on their hospital beds. Then Mortimer turned his attention to their father, who would need help of a different kind than that of unguents. Gennady laid still unconscious on another hospital bed. Mortimer stood close, meditating over him. He closed his eyes and began to move his hands, flat with palms down, slowly above his patient's head, probing the depths of the mind within. He stilled his hands when he found the divergence he sought, then spoke rapidly under his breath for a few moments. Gennady came to, sat up, and said, "Who are you? What are you?" He remembered this tall man in a purple robe with matching pointed hat that hovered over him, remembered him being angry with an extremely large baby bird, but he couldn't remember why, and he couldn't remember how he himself had come to be in this strange place. He saw his boys napping on 2 other beds and wondered how all of them had got here. He did not remember that his boys had nearly been killed and eaten by the baby thunderbird. "I don't know why you brought us here," he told the strange man, "but could you please take me and my boys back home now?" "That I cannot do," said Mortimer, "but tomorrow I will take you from here to the village. There I will register you at the boarding-house, and there you will reside from now on." "What do you mean, reside? We don't got to do that. We got us a house on Loopback Ridge, and that's where we got to go." The only response Gennady received from the man was a blank stare that seemed to penetrate his soul. Gennady's head began to hurt then, and he laid back down on the bed and went to sleep. 6. The following day, when the wizard deemed Gennady and his boys healthy, physically and mentally, he guided them to the boarding-house and checked them into their new quarters. "I hope these are the last people you put in here," Maeve whispered to Mortimer. "With so many occupying this room, some of them will have to sleep on the floor." "They're all big boys," replied the wizard. "They can handle it." "Mister," said Gennady, "me and my boys are kind of hungry. Do you suppose we could have something to eat?" "Not until supper this evening," said Mortimer. Maeve spoke up then. "Only 2 meals, breakfast and supper, are served here each day, because everyone who lives in this boarding-house works all day long. And," she said as she glanced at the twins, "no snacks are served either." Frowns appeared on both boys' faces, to Maeve's satisfaction. She turned with a smirk and left the room. "I heard that woman say we'd be sharing this here room with some other folks," Gennady said to the wizard. "Will they be folks with manners?" "It depends on what you mean by manners," said Mortimer. "In any case, you'll have to wait and see. but it won't be until evening when their work is done and they come home. Perhaps you'll meet them at supper." He raised an eyebrow at Gennady and quickly departed the room. 7. Gennady, George, and Glenn were all so hungry when they sat down to eat supper that evening that they didn't recognize at first who they sat next to. Chuck noticed them first. "Gennady," he said, giving the man a pat on the back. "How nice to see y'all here." His enthusiasm came mostly from an idea he had that Gennady and his boys might know the way back to Kentucky. "Well, what are y'all doing here, Chuck?" asked Gennady as he took a bite of a roll. He hadn't bothered to butter it, and he chewed it as if it were the last bit of food he would ever eat. After he swallowed it, he said, "When did you get here? Today, same as us?" "Heck no," said Chuck. "I've been here going on a week now." Bo, who sat to the other side of Chuck, leaned across and said, "Hey, how are you, Gennady? I got here about 2 weeks ago myself." Neither Bo nor Chuck had yet noticed the Breen twins. George and Glenn started laughing, and all three men looked over at them. The twins laughed harder. Chuck frowned, Bo scowled at them, and Gennady tried to shush his boys, but to no avail. "What's so funny?" asked Bo. "It ain't been no 2 weeks, Mr. Purdy," said Glenn, still laughing. "We just seen you a few days ago when we was all working on the road." "It was a whole lot longer ago than that," said Bo. "I been here 2 weeks at least." The boys' laughter trailed off, and their faces became serious. "No, Glenn's right," said George. "It was Wednesday we last seen you, 4 days ago. And Mr. Whitney, we saw you just last night." Bo said, "The morning of the Saturday we was supposed to meet in town was the last day I was in Kentucky, and I'm telling you that was 2 weeks ago." "Hold on now," said Chuck. "We did meet in town on Saturday. All of us besides you, Bo. We had us a picnic there, and that was 1 week ago." Now Gennady piped up. "Chuck, the Saturday you're talking about was only a couple of days ago. Me and my boys come here the morning after the picnic, and that was Sunday morning, which was yesterday." All 5 were now confused. "Was yesterday a Sunday?" Chuck shouted out to everyone in the room. A man at the supper table, many chairs up from them, called out, "What do you mean, Sunday? We get sun every day." Across from him a second man said, "You're wrong. There's 2 suns every day." The first replied, "Sun's Day, then." To Chuck he said, "What do you mean, Sun's Day?" A third man intervened. "Don't be dense. He means the name of the day, as in Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, and so on, like we used to have." "Don't you remember the names of the days?" "Why should I?" replied the first. "No one calls them by name any more. Sunday, what's that?" Someone else took up the cause. "Or Monday. Does anyone here remember what Monday is?" Chuck recognized this voice as belonging to Gus. Gus had more to say. "I don't know why we ever named days to begin with. Each day is like any other day." There were sounds of agreement all around. "That's just about the way of it," said Maeve as she walked past the Kentuckians to hand Gennady a note from the wizard. "No reason to name the days, nor to number them either. That's just old-fashioned nonsense." Bo leaned toward the others and said, "You know, I ain't been here a whole lot longer than the rest of you, but dang it if I ain't stopped remembering the days, too." "It's Monday," George whispered to Glenn. "We won't forget the days of the week." Glenn nodded agreement, but on his face he had a strange, almost frightened look. "Say, what's that you got there?" Chuck asked Gennady, referring to the note that Maeve had handed to him. "I don't know," said Gennady. looking at the words on the paper that he held in his hand. "I don't know how to read." "I'll read it to you if you want," said Chuck. Gennady handed him the letter from the wizard, and Chuck put it down flat on the table and began to read. "To the Breen family. All of you will begin your new jobs tomorrow. You will be working alongside Chuck and Bo, your neighbors from Kentucky, keeping the privies and the chamber pots therein clean and sanitized all throughout the village each morning and afternoon. You are fortunate to already know those you will be working with. If you pay close attention, you will become experts within a day or two." "Oh, yuck," said both the boys at once. "We don't want to do that," said Glenn. "You gotta," Chuck said stoically. "You got no more choice about it than we did. We didn't like it at first neither, but it ain't so bad. Be glad that you get a free room and 2 square meals a day for your work. You do got a room here, don't you?" "Sure enough," said Gennady. "It's a nice, airy room, but the landlady told us we got to share it with some others." "Who were they?" asked Bo. "We was told that maybe we'd meet 'em at supper," said Gennady. "But since that ain't happened, I guess we'll meet 'em when we're done eatin' and go back to our room." "Well, supposin' that we all meet somewheres after that," said Chuck. "It'd be nice to compare stories of how we got here and what not, don't you think?" "That sounds like a right good plan," said Gennady. "We'll catch up with y'all out on the front porch of this here boarding house after we clean up and meet our new roommates." 8. After supper, all 5 left the kitchen together and entered the main hall of the 1-story building. They were surprised when they all paused before the door of the same room. "You don't got to come in here with us," Bo said to Gennady. "Y'all go on to your own room, and we'll meet you outside real soon." "This is our own room," Gennady said meekly. "Yeah," said both the twins, not so meekly. "What?" cried Bo. Chuck took over and said, "Are y'all tellin' us that Maeve checked you and your boys into this here room today?" "Yep," said Gennady, "but she didn't say we'd be bunkin' with y'all." "Well, let's go in then," said Chuck. "I'm sure we'll be more comfortable talkin' inside than out here in the hall." Once all 5 were inside and the door was shut, the room seemed smaller than it had before. They stood around looking awkwardly. Chuck said to the newcomers, "There ain't no chairs in here, only them 2 beds." "Yep," said Gennady. "We noticed that." The boys climbed onto the bed closest to the wall and claimed it for their own. "We'll take this bed," said Glenn, "even if it is a bit hard." "Hey, that's my bed," growled Bo through gritted teeth. "Does it really matter, Bo?" said Chuck. "We all gotta sleep somewheres. You can share my bed with me. It's closer to the window anyways." Bo turned his burning gaze from the twins to Chuck and said, "All right, but I ain't happy about it." He resumed glaring at the twins and added, "But only if I gets the side of the bed that's closest to the window." "You got it," replied Chuck. Under his breath he said, "It ain't all that closer to the window anyways." Bo overheard that and said, "But it ain't as close to the twins." Gennady, deep in thought, sat down at the foot of the bed in the middle of his boys. Chuck walked over to him and asked, "What is it, Gennady? What's making you look so sad?" Gennady looked up at Chuck and said, "Do you think that wizard man is punishing all of us 'cause we's from Kentucky?" Bo made a scoffing sound. "You make it sound like he's shopping round Kentucky just for Johnny house cleaners." "Hold on, Bo," said Chuck. "Maybe Gennady's got a point. That wizard did bring us all here, and won't tell us why. And he's got us all cleaning Johnny houses, something that guy Gus told me no one else round here would do." Chuck's face turned grim. "I think he is punishing us. And I'll tell you something else. I think he ought to tell us the reason why." "Now you put it like that, I guess I'd like to know it myself," said Bo. None of the 5 males from Kentucky were told the truth of why they had been brought to Carlisle. It was because they'd all had the misfortune of seeing Mortimer of the Immortal 3 in his full wizardly form. 9. The men took turns washing up from supper, with a clean bowl of water on top of the dresser, which Maeve had placed there earlier in the afternoon. First Gennady scrubbed his hands and face, followed by Bo, then Chuck. At the other side of the room, the boys stood up on the pallet of the bed which they had chosen for their own, and began to wrestle with one another. Glenn twisted George's left foot out from under him, causing him to fall on the bed. "Ooh, I'll get you for that," George said to Glenn, then got up and knocked his brother's head against the wall. "Oh, yeah?" said Glenn. "Well, I'll get you for that." He grabbed George's head and banged it against the wall. They were a resilient pair, and kept it up for more than a few minutes. Bo gritted his teeth, but bit his tongue as well. He wished the twins would cease their annoying activity, but wishing was the best he could do, because it was their father's place to discipline them, not his. He swore to himself that if their father weren't there, he'd stop their mayhem so fast their heads would spin. While Chuck was still washing up, an intermittent knocking sound started to come from the wall next to the bed where the boys continued their noisy wrestling and head-bumping. The knocking from the other side of the wall intensified until it became a constant, loud pounding, and finally they heard a deep voice shouting, "Hey, whoever you are in that room, stop that loud racket, or I'll go fetch Maeve, and she'll throw you right out on the street." All 3 men ran over to the boys, grabbed them, and held them still. Then Gennady sat down between George and Glenn and clasped a hand over each boy's mouth. "It's time for the 2 of you to go over to the bowl now and wash up," Gennady whispered to his boys. George and Glenn washed up as they were told, and then returned to the bed next to the wall where they each took a seat on either side of their father. "Stay there like that," Chuck told Gennady, "and me and Bo will sit on our bed across from you. That ways we can talk without being overheard. Let's start with how we all got here." "I don't reckon I know how me and my boys got here," said Gennady. "I can't remember." Chuck gave him a strange look, and then asked the twins, "Do you 2 remember leaving Kentucky and coming here?" Glenn said, "All I remember is us leaving that big building with that strange man you all call the Wizard." "What's the last thing you remember before that?" asked Chuck. Glenn thought for a moment, then said, "I remember our faces got ruined on Loopback Ridge the next morning after the picnic." "Yeah, I remember that too," said George. "A monster bird, a baby just hatched from its shell, done it. It picked out my eyeball with its great big beak, and it ripped off your cheek and ate it, Glenn." "I remember that happening," said Glenn, raising his hand and holding it against his cheek. A faraway look came into his eyes. "But I don't remember nothing else till we woke up here today." "How do you think our faces got better? Do you think that wizard man did it?" George asked his brother. "He must have," said Glenn, "but I don't remember him doing it. Do you, Pa?" "Like I says, I can't remember nothing, not a single thing," said his father, his eyes now looking far away. "Except, now that you mention it, I do remember something about a great big bird. The wizard man was yelling at it. He was awful mad at it, and I think he killed it, but I don't remember it harming neither of you." The very thought of that happening seemed to frighten Gennady. "Don't none of you remember coming through a tunnel with lights and color swirling through it?" asked Chuck. All of the Breens shook their heads no. "Or before that, going through a door in the side of the mountain and into a cave?" asked Bo. Again they shook their heads no. "Mr. Whitney, Mr. Purdy," George said suddenly, "what is this place? Why is it so strange?" "Yeah," said Glenn. "For starters, why don't no one know what day of the week it is?" "I'll take this one, if you don't mind," Chuck told Bo, who looked clueless anyway. "First of all, boys, I think y'all ought to know this. You did come to this place through a tunnel. It connects whatever this place is with Kentucky. It's the only way to get here and the only way to get back home." Chuck didn't really know this as fact, but he forced himself to sound confident. "And that tunnel is somewheres inside the wizard's big building." He turned to Bo and said, "Right?" "Right," said Bo, no longer looking clueless. "Did any of you Breens see them 2 suns up in the sky today?" "2 suns?" said Gennady. "The wizard took us out of his building and dragged us along to this boarding house so fast we didn't see us no sun, let alone 2 suns. But I guess I shouldn't talk for George and Glenn. What do you 2 remember about coming to this boarding house?" Both boys shrugged their shoulders. "I don't remember nothing," said George. "That wizard must have had us under some kind of spell." Glenn nodded in agreement. "Well, there's 2 suns, all right," said Chuck. "And y'all are going to be seeing 'em, if you're wanting to or not, 'cause they's there each and every day. There's one on each end of the sky. They ain't very big, and they don't move across the sky or nothing. They just comes up and goes down, all in the same place. And I think that pretty much proves we ain't in Kentucky no more." "Where are we?" asked George. "Folks here call it Carnisle," said Bo, looking to Chuck. Chuck nodded and said, "From what I gather, they think it's an island, though I ain't seen no shore nor sea. Did y'all notice that foggy mist all round the edges of the land?" "I saw that," said Gennady. "I thought it was just the weather being strange." "The weather here don't never change," said Bo. "It don't get cold nor hot neither. And I been here long enough to know something about them mists. They's always there. And don't go trying to see what's on the other side of 'em, 'cause there ain't nothing. Least that's what the folks here say." "I heard the same," said Chuck. "Tell 'em about the moon," said Bo. The Breens looked attentively at Chuck. "The moons. Y'all ain't seen nothing till you seen them moons. There's 2 of 'em, and they's bigger than the suns, and they put on a show like you never seen before. They jump, kick, and dance all over the sky like it's some kind of hoedown or something. You'll see 'em after it gets dark." George and Glenn looked excited. Gennady just looked scared. He whispered, mostly to himself, "What is this God-forsaken place, and who made it?" The other 4 looked at each other and said, all at once, "The wizard." "Makes sense," said Bo. "The folks here sure think he's in charge." "Let's talk about the folks here," said Chuck. "There's some mighty strange things about 'em. Like what Glenn said, they don't know what day it is. Bo, you said earlier you forgot yourself, and now I gotta admit, so have I." "What's your point?" said Bo. "That it ain't just that this place is strange. The people are strange, too. But they's decent folk, other'n being strange. What I think is that living in this place has made 'em strange, and I think it's starting to make us strange, too." What Chuck said was awful, but no one argued with it. They all sat still, looking at each other. Finally, Gennady spoke up. "You think the wizard owns this here land?" "Sure seems like it," said Chuck. "Does he own the suns and the moons, too?" George wanted to know. "I guess so," said Chuck, "but I don't think he understands 'em. I asked him about him after my first night here, but all he said was not to ask so many questions. He's hard to talk to, said Bo. What I mean is, there's always so many people round him that you can barely see him. I haven't seen him for a while myself, said Chuck, but if I ever gets a hold of him, I'm going to ask him so many questions, it'll take him all day to answer 'em. 10. It's getting dark, said George. I think the sun has gone down. Can we go outside and watch the moons? I think it's better if we watch 'em from here, said Chuck. Pa, said Glenn, will you take us outside to see the moons? It's only our first night in this here place, said Gennady. I really think we ought to stay inside. But this room is crowded, complained George. Only since your brains got here, said Bo. George stuck his tongue out at him. I want to go home, said Glenn. Me too, said George. I don't like it here. We're going to find a way back home, declared Glenn. Good luck with that, scoffed Bo. Don't forget, the way home's inside that big building the wizard keeps locked up tight. He don't want none of us going home. Most likely y'all won't never leave here. That's not a very nice thing to say to my boys, said Gennady. Hey, all of you, come on over here to the window, Chuck said. Here comes the moons right now. All of them ran to the window, where they watched the moons play around for half an hour, until their dancing across the sky took them away from their view. Well, that was something, said George. Yeah, not too bad, said Glenn. But it still ain't worth being in this here awful place, where we gotta clean out Johnny houses all day long every day. The boys trudged back to their bed, took off their shoes, and laid down, resting their heads on the bed's only pillow. When their father came to bed, he would lie between them in the opposite direction, pillowless, his feet resting near their heads. Although a clumsy situation, it was better than having no bed at all. 11. The men stayed by the window a while, breathing in the fresh night air. I miss my Suzanne, Chuck said after a few minutes. I miss her a bunch. That's why I want to go back to Kentucky. If I could just catch that wizard alone, I might make myself a deal with him. If you go home, Chuck, you gotta promise you'll take me with you, said Bo. I'm starting to get tired of this place. I never thought I'd miss doing farm work, but it was a whole lot better'n what I gotta do here. Maybe if I felt like I was getting somewheres, not just working for food and a place to sleep at night. I don't know. If I was a woman, I just might cry. I'm glad I got y'all here with me. He wiped at something on the side of his cheek and hoped that no one noticed it was a tear. Please, don't never go from this place and leave me here alone. If you want to go back to Kentucky like me, said Chuck, then you gotta help me find the way. You don't gotta talk to the wizard yourself. You just let me know if you see him. Gennady turned around and said to his boys, Do the two of you want to help Chuck find the wizard man so's you can go back home? If so, y'all will have to go without me. Don't you want to go home with us, Pa? Asked Glenn. I'm too tired to even think about going home. Probably from that spell the wizard put on me. But I can't tell you boys what to do. I'll miss you a lot, though, if you do go. Here or home? Said Glenn. Home or here? What you think about going home without Pa, George? Let's see now. What we got waiting for us at home without Pa? Said George. The boys cried out in unison, Ma! And then they pretended to throw up. Glenn said, We don't want to go home alone, Pa. We want to stay here with you. The boys would miss playing tricks on the people back home, but there was nothing stopping them from playing tricks on the people here. As they laid alone in their bed before their father joined them, they quietly plotted the first prank they would play in this new world. When Gennady came to bed, the twins stayed awake and waited until all three men were snoring. Then they snuck out of bed